To me, Shedeur Sanders is the starter on this team. Dylan Gabriel's the backup, which I think is what he's going to be for his career and can be a good one. And I'm finding a way. I'm calling Denver. I'm checking, how did you do this with the Russell Wilson contract? How did you structure it all? I'd get Deshaun Watson out of town. I think Todd Monken's a heck of a coach. And the Browns put in their time. I really thought they were going to go with Jim Schwartz, but Monken makes sense because of what they have to do with.
Cleveland doesn't usually fall apart all at once. It starts quietly. One decision behind closed doors, one meeting that drags on too long, one name that suddenly stops getting mentioned the way it used to. And right now, the Browns are standing at one of those moments that looks small on the surface, but could quietly shape everything about 2026. Because this isn't just about a defensive coordinator. It's not just about a new head coach finding his footing. And it's definitely not just about scheme or play calling. This is about control, about respect, and about whether the Browns are finally ready to protect the one thing that's actually been working. On one side, you have a defense that's carried this franchise when the offense couldn't breathe. A unit that didn't just keep games close, it changed how opponents prepared for Cleveland. On the other, a brand new head coach walking into his first real test of authority before he's even coached a game. And hovering over all of it is one question nobody wants to say out loud yet. What happens if this goes wrong? Because the timing couldn't be worse. A young quarterback era is forming. Expectations are rising again, and the margin for error is razor thin. One misstep now doesn't just affect next Sunday, it reshapes the locker room, the trust level, and how this franchise is viewed league-wide. What makes this situation even more tense is that it didn't explode publicly. There was no
as their next head coach. That's the latest from our NFL insider Jonathan Jones and Matt Zenitz. Monken has served as the Ravens offensive coordinator for the past 3 seasons. He's also had stints as OC with the Browns and the Bucks. It'll be his first head coaching opportunity at any level. Monken will take over a Browns team that has won just 1 playoff game this century. Our Jonathan Jones also reporting that Monken is expected to enter Week 1 with Shedeur Sanders as his starting QB.
Press conference meltdown, no dramatic firing, just sudden movement, sudden silence, and then reports that raised eyebrows across the league. Some fans think they already know how this ends. Others believe the Browns are finally playing chess instead of checkers. But the truth? The most important parts of this story are happening where fans can't see them, in negotiations, in power dynamics, and in decisions that won't be obvious until it's too late to undo them. And once you understand what's really at stake here, it becomes clear. This isn't a side story. This is the foundation everything else rests on. It didn't start with a press conference. It didn't start with an announcement. It started with movement. Quiet movement. Reports began to circulate that Jim Schwartz had cleared out his office, desks emptied, conversations wrapped up, goodbyes exchanged, and just like that, a wave of unease rippled through Cleveland, not because fans were told something bad had happened, but because no one was told anything at all. That silence was the first red flag. Within hours, speculation took over. Some insiders claimed Schwartz had already made up his mind. Others suggested he was simply exploring options. But what set off the panic wasn't rumor alone, it was the timing. This was happening right as the Browns were turning the page to a new head coach, a new offensive direction, and a season where stability mattered more than ever. For a franchise that has struggled to keep its footing, the idea of losing the one constant that actually worked hit a nerve. Schwartz wasn't just another coordinator on the staff. He was the architect behind an identity Cleveland fans finally trusted, a defense that didn't rely on luck, a unit that didn't crumble late, a group that imposed itself week after week. So when word spread that he might be gone, the reaction wasn't casual concern, it was alarm. Social media lit up almost instantly. Fans weren't asking if this would hurt the team, they were asking how badly. And then the story took another turn. Insiders began linking Schwartz to other teams, Vegas, Philadelphia, possibilities that suggested this wasn't just leverage, it might be an exit. At the same time, the Browns stayed quiet, no reassurance, no denial, just more silence. That silence created a vacuum, and in Cleveland, vacuums get filled fast. Some fans believed Schwartz felt passed over, others thought money was the issue. A few suspected power struggles behind the scenes. None of it was confirmed, but the uncertainty was enough to shift the mood entirely. What should have been an off-season of cautious optimism suddenly felt fragile. And here's the part that made it worse. This wasn't happening after a losing season. It was happening after a year where the defense carried the franchise, where records were broken, where opposing offenses dreaded seeing Cleveland on the schedule. Losing that continuity now wouldn't just sting, it would reset progress at the worst possible moment. That's why panic set in so quickly. Not because Jim Schwartz officially left, but because it suddenly felt like he might. And once that door cracked open, everything about the Browns' future felt uncertain. But that wasn't the full picture. The situation shifted the moment Jim Schwartz walked back into the building. Just days after reports suggested he was gone for good, insiders revealed Schwartz had returned to the Browns facility for direct conversations with ownership. No press release, no public statement, just closed doors and quiet discussions. And instantly the narrative changed. This wasn't a clean exit anymore. According to reports, nothing had been finalized, no goodbye, no agreement elsewhere, which raised an obvious question: if Schwartz was truly done, why come back at all? That's where the layers started to emerge. Some around the league believed this wasn't about walking away from Cleveland, it was about leverage. Schwartz had just overseen one of the most dominant defensive stretches the franchise has seen in decades. Elite rankings, historic sack totals, players thriving across the board. If there was ever a moment to push for more control, more security, or a bigger paycheck, this was it. Others think it went deeper than money. Schwartz wasn't just any assistant coach. There were quiet expectations, both inside and outside the building, that he could be a head coaching candidate. When the Browns chose Todd Monken instead, some fans believe that decision landed heavier than the team let on, not publicly, but personally. That kind of disappointment doesn't always explode, sometimes it simmers. Still, none of this has been confirmed. These are interpretations based on timing, movement, and how unusual this situation became so quickly. What is clear is that the Browns want him back. The defense wants him back. Ownership hasn't shut the door, and Schwartz hasn't either. But there's a catch. This is no longer just about Schwartz and the front office. Enter Todd Monken. With Monken stepping in as head coach, he now holds real authority over the staff. Even if ownership finds a way to satisfy Schwartz, Monken has to believe this is a long-term fit. Reports suggest Monken is open to retaining Schwartz, but only under one condition: full commitment. No half measures, no one foot out the door, no coordinator treating Cleveland as a stepping stone while waiting for the next call. For a first-time head coach, the last thing Monken needs is uncertainty on his own sideline. And that's where things get delicate. Because Monken isn't coming in to fix the defense. He's coming in to revive an offense that has lagged behind. The entire vision depends on pairing his offensive focus with a defense that can remain elite without constant supervision. Schwartz staying would make that transition smoother, but only if his heart is fully in it. That's the tension. Cleveland wants continuity. Schwartz wants clarity. Monken wants alignment. And when those three don't line up perfectly, negotiations get complicated fast. That's when the conversation quietly shifted. The Browns aren't just deciding whether to keep a defensive coordinator. They're deciding how much risk they're willing to take with the one thing that's actually working. Cleveland's defense didn't become elite by accident. It was built methodically, refined week after week, and trusted by the locker room. When players line up already believing the system will work, that's not scheme, that's culture. And culture is fragile. If Jim Schwartz walks away, the Browns don't lose talent overnight, they lose certainty. That's the part fans don't always see. Swapping coordinators isn't just about play calls. It's terminology, responsibilities, adjustments mid-game, confidence on third down. One small tweak can ripple through an entire unit that's been operating on instinct. And the timing couldn't be worse. Todd Monken was hired to fix the offense, not to rebuild half the coaching staff. The original plan was clear: stabilize the defense, unlock the offense, and finally stop wasting elite performances on one side of the ball. Losing Schwartz forces Monken into a problem he wasn't hired to solve. That creates pressure immediately. Some fans believe the Browns could plug and play another defensive mind and keep rolling. History suggests that's optimistic. Even great rosters stumble when leadership changes abruptly. Systems don't carry trust, people do. Then there's the message this sends inside the locker room. Players notice everything. They know who fights for them. They know who puts them in positions to succeed. If the organization hesitates or lowballs a coach they believe in, it raises eyebrows, not because of ego, but because it signals priorities. And this defense has earned leverage. From dominant pass rushes to lockdown coverage, this unit has been the reason Cleveland stayed competitive when the offense stalled. Walk away from that foundation and suddenly the margin for error disappears. Games tighten, mistakes matter more, and pressure shifts to areas that haven't proven reliable yet. Still, keeping Schwartz isn't risk-free either. A coordinator who feels overlooked or frustrated isn't the same coach players rallied around before. If Schwartz returns without buy-in, that can quietly undermine everything. Body language changes, energy fades, and the cracks don't show up until it's too late. That's the dilemma. Cleveland must decide whether stability is worth the price, financially and politically, or whether it's time to trust the structure he built without him. Either choice reshapes the 2026 season before a single snap is played. And what happens next doesn't just impact the defense. It determines how much pressure lands on Todd Monken from day one. What makes this situation even more delicate is the quiet power shift happening inside the building. For the first time in a long time, the Browns don't have a head coach inheriting chaos. Todd Monken is stepping into a locker room with a clear identity on one side of the ball. That's rare in Cleveland, and it changes everything about how authority is perceived. Normally, a new head coach arrives with a mandate to overhaul. New voices, new systems, a clean slate. That's not the case here. This defense isn't asking to be saved, it's asking not to be disrupted. That puts Monken in a tricky spot. On paper, he has final say over his staff. In reality, walking in and immediately parting ways with a coordinator the players trust can feel less like leadership and more like insecurity, especially when that coordinator's unit has been outperforming expectations year after year. Some fans believe Monken will defer completely to the defense and focus solely on offense. Reports suggest that's his preference, but preferences don't eliminate politics. Every major decision he makes early will define how players interpret his leadership style. Is he collaborative? Or is he consolidating control? That question matters because defensive leaders tend to have long memories. If players feel their side of the ball is being treated as expendable, buy-in erodes quietly. Effort doesn't disappear, urgency does. At the same time, Monken can't afford to look like a head coach in name only. If ownership pushes to keep Schwartz and Monken simply rubber stamps it, that sets another precedent. It tells the locker room where real authority lives, and in the NFL, blurred leadership lines create confusion fast. That's why this decision is less about scheme and more about alignment. Reports claim Monken is open to retaining Schwartz, but only if there's full commitment. That detail matters. It suggests Monken understands the risk of a half-in, half-out coordinator more than the risk of change itself. Because nothing undermines a team faster than mixed signals. If Schwartz stays, he needs to be all the way in. If he leaves, Monken needs a replacement who doesn't just copy the system but earns trust quickly. Either way, Monken's credibility is on the line before his first opening kickoff. This is the moment where players decide whether they're following a coach or just playing for the logo. And once that perception sets in, it's almost impossible to reset. That's why this isn't just a coaching decision. It's the first real test of Todd Monken's leadership, and the Browns don't get a redo if it goes sideways. And that's when the stakes quietly climbed even higher. There's another layer to this situation that hasn't been said out loud, but everyone inside the building is aware of it. Time is not on Cleveland's side. Coaching decisions like this don't live in a vacuum. Free agency planning, draft preparation, and off-season installs are already underway. Every day this drags on quietly tightens the window for whoever ends up running the defense. And that's where the contract piece comes back into focus. Jim Schwartz isn't just weighing loyalty or pride, he's weighing leverage. Clearing out his office wasn't just an emotional move, it was a signal. A reminder that he has options even if they aren't fully visible yet. Some insiders believe Schwartz is using time as pressure. The longer the Browns wait, the more uncomfortable the situation becomes. At some point, indecision itself becomes disruptive. From Cleveland's perspective, there's risk on both sides. Pay Schwartz more, and you risk setting a precedent that elite coordinators can outmuscle the head coach. Let him walk, and you risk destabilizing the strongest part of your roster at the worst possible moment. That's why this feels less like negotiation and more like a starring contest. Ownership wants continuity, Monken wants clarity, Schwartz wants respect and possibly security beyond one more season. Reports suggest Schwartz is aware this may be his last realistic shot at positioning himself for another head coaching opportunity. Another elite season could reopen doors, but only if the situation feels stable enough to commit fully. That's the tension. If he stays on a short-term deal without expanded authority, is he really advancing his future, or just treading water while the league moves on? At the same time, the Browns can't afford to wait forever. Defensive installs aren't plug-and-play. Even a familiar scheme needs leadership continuity, staff alignment, and off-season reps. The silent deadline is approaching fast. Once players return for off-season programs, the identity of the defensive leader needs to be clear. Uncertainty bleeds into preparation. Preparation bleeds into performance. Some fans believe the Browns will cave and pay the premium. Others think Monken will make a clean break to establish control early. Right now, neither outcome is locked in. But what is clear is this: the longer this goes unresolved, the more damage it does regardless of who wins. This isn't about ego anymore. It's about timing, leverage, and whether Cleveland can finally avoid creating a problem that didn't need to exist in the first place. And just when it seemed like the choice was narrowing, another variable quietly entered the conversation. While executives negotiate and coaches posture, there's one group quietly tracking every move: the players. This situation isn't happening in isolation. Inside that locker room, veterans already know what instability feels like. Coaching changes, scheme shifts, promises that don't last. That's why this moment matters more than the press releases suggest. Jim Schwartz isn't just a coordinator to this defense, he's the voice they trust, the system they understand, the standard they've bought into. When he cleared out his office, it didn't go unnoticed. Players noticed the silence, they noticed the uncertainty. Defenses, more than any other unit, thrive on clarity, roles, responsibilities, accountability. When that structure feels shaky, performance slips fast. Myles Garrett doesn't need another motivational speech, he needs consistency. Denzel Ward doesn't need a scheme overhaul, he needs trust that what worked will still be there tomorrow. And then there's the younger core. Rookies and second-year players are watching how the organization handles someone they respect. They're learning what leverage looks like here, what loyalty really means, whether production is rewarded or quietly negotiated away. That matters, because culture isn't built in slogans, it's built in moments like this. Todd Monken understands that. As a first-time head coach, this is one of his earliest tests of leadership, not on the field, but in perception. If Schwartz stays, players want to see alignment. If he leaves, they want to see decisiveness. What they don't want is limbo. Some insiders believe players have already voiced support behind closed doors. Not demands, not ultimatums, just quiet signals that continuity matters, that confidence matters. At the same time, Monken can't allow the locker room to feel like it dictates staffing decisions. That's a slippery slope. Authority has to be clear, even if the decision isn't popular. That's the tightrope. If Schwartz returns without full buy-in, players will feel it. If he leaves without a clear plan, they'll feel that too. And there's another layer. Quarterback transitions amplify everything. With Shador Sanders expected to enter 2026 as the starter, the defense becomes even more important early. Young quarterbacks rely on stability elsewhere. They need the margin for error a strong defense provides. That's why this decision echoes beyond one role. The locker room doesn't need perfection. It needs confidence that the people in charge know exactly where this is going. Because once doubt creeps in, it spreads fast. And the next move Cleveland makes will tell everyone inside that building exactly what kind of season they're preparing for. But just when it seemed like the focus was purely defensive, the quarterback conversation started heating up in unexpected ways. Just when this looked like a defensive-only decision, the quarterback timeline quietly changed the stakes. Because this isn't happening in a vacuum, the Browns are preparing for a transition under center, and that reality is shaping every major choice behind the scenes. All signs point to Shedeur Sanders entering 2026 as the starter, not as a project, not as a placeholder, as the guy, and that matters more than most fans realize. Young quarterbacks need structure. They need a team that already knows who it is. The fewer moving parts around them, the faster they settle in. That's where the defense becomes the safety net. A stable, elite defense buys patience. It shortens games, it lowers pressure, it gives a young QB room to grow without feeling like every mistake is fatal. That's why continuity on defense suddenly feels urgent. If Jim Schwartz stays, the Browns can walk into 2026 knowing one side of the ball is already elite. Monken can focus entirely on molding the offense around Sanders. That's the ideal scenario. If Schwartz leaves, the margin for error disappears. Now you're asking a rookie quarterback to adjust while the defense also recalibrates. New voice, new tendencies, new growing pains. That's a risky combination even for talented teams. Some fans believe this is exactly why ownership hasn't closed the door yet. Reports suggest the Browns understand the optics. Moving on from Schwartz right as Sanders takes over could send the wrong signal not just to fans but to the locker room and the quarterback himself. This is about alignment. Monken was hired to modernize the offense. Sanders represents the future of that vision. The defense was never supposed to be the question mark. And yet here we are. There's also a subtle power dynamic at play. A new head coach and a high-profile quarterback often reshape influence inside a building. Veterans notice, assistants notice, everyone recalibrates. Keeping Schwartz could anchor that transition. Letting him walk shifts the balance entirely to Monken's side of the ball, whether he wants that responsibility or not. And then there's Deshaun Watson's contract looming in the background, an uncomfortable reminder of how quickly long-term plans can go sideways. That's why some fans believe the Browns can't afford another destabilizing gamble. Not now. Not with a young QB waiting. Not with a defense already built to win. Whatever decision is made will ripple outward. It will shape how Sanders is protected, how Monken is judged, and how patient the organization expects the fanbase to be. This isn't just about who calls plays on defense. It's about whether Cleveland is setting up its next quarterback to succeed or forcing him to carry chaos from day one. And that brings us to the final, uncomfortable question the Browns can't avoid much longer. This is the fork in the road the Browns can't dance around anymore. Every move up to this point has been about promise, about potential, about getting close. Now comes the moment where intent has to turn into action. Keeping Jim Schwartz isn't just about comfort, it's about signaling stability. It tells the locker room that elite performance still matters, that results are rewarded, that continuity isn't negotiable when you're this close to being real contenders. Letting him walk sends a different message. It says the organization is willing to reset again, even when something is clearly working. It says trust is conditional, and it forces Todd Monken into a situation he was never hired for, fixing problems that didn't need fixing. That's the risk. Monken was brought in to unlock the offense, not rebuild the identity of the entire team. If Schwartz leaves and the defense slips, the pressure won't fall on the new coordinator first. It'll land squarely on the head coach. And that clock will start ticking immediately. Some fans believe this decision will quietly define Monken's entire tenure. Reports suggest that if the Browns stumble early in 2026, this moment will be the one everyone points back to, not the play calls, not the injuries, this choice. On the flip side, bringing Schwartz back isn't risk-free either. If he returns distracted, resentful, or already looking toward his next opportunity, that can fracture trust just as quickly. A disengaged coordinator can do damage that doesn't show up on the stat sheet until it's too late. That's why Monken's stance matters so much. Commitment isn't optional anymore. Either you're fully in or the door needs to close now, not halfway through a season. This is where leadership shows itself. The Browns don't need another year of maybes, they don't need another experiment, they need clarity. For the veterans who have carried this defense, for the young players stepping into bigger roles, and especially for the quarterback future waiting in the wings. Because windows in the NFL don't stay open long. Elite defenses don't last forever, rookie contracts expire fast, fan patience runs even faster. This decision will ripple through everything that comes next: how the locker room feels, how the offense is judged, how much margin for error exists when things inevitably get messy. The Browns can choose continuity and maximize what they already have. Or they can gamble again and hope the ground doesn't shift beneath their feet. There's no neutral outcome here. Only direction. And whatever path Cleveland takes, we'll find out very quickly whether it was the move that finally pushed them forward or another turn that kept them right where they've always been.